with this, very much welcome to today's webinar, which is about data literature mirroring and showing how this is a back and frontward struggle. And with this, let me introduce, I'm Dr. Andreas Meiszner, co-founder and mentor of the Doctorate Hub, and I had the pleasure to be on today once again. And I hope that as a learning outcomes of today's webinar, you will learn a bit on how to use mirroring as a tool, so to assure that the literature and data inform each other across your thesis. And more specifically, first of all, to understand what mirroring is about, how to mirror your data in the literature through the thesis document, to understand which type of different data literature mirroring angles exist, and to learn about the prerequisites for data literature mirroring to work. And then in the closing, we will reflect on the things discussed. And as said, that part will be off the record. So if you do have any questions, then please be welcome to ask them also then. If today's webinar is interesting to you, but you want to train a bit further on how to use mirroring, then you can do so. We have a free advanced course. Free means you can sign up. All of the content is available for self-study. So it's about writing up and structuring your thesis, and mirroring is a part of this course that will be covered. Or you also alternatively can enroll in one of our workshops, which come on a one-on-one base at any point in time. Or if you prefer to study in a group, then on Saturday 11th, we also have a half-day workshop available on that matter. Now, with this, let's move into the webinar and start with what is mirroring all about. Now, in a nutshell, it's a systematic approach to see how the different parts of the thesis relate to each other. And the thesis here is, again, also a mirror of your research work. So working over your thesis document allows you to exactly match out the different parts of your research. Therefore, it is also a tool that helps building up consistency across the thesis and to remove and detect inconsistency. And it can serve you as an analytical framework to support boundary building, means to understand clearly what is within the core of your research and what is out of the core. And it also is a mean to communicate your work to others, including your supervisors or the examiners. And finally, it is century-old. So it's nothing that we at Doctorate Hub have come up with, but it's a technique used for more than 100 years. It's used in music, it's used in science, it's used in mathematics, and we have a dedicated webinar just on this. So if you today see, okay, mirroring is something you would like to learn more about, then next to courses and workshops, we also have another webinar on that matter. So let's get a bit more concrete and less abstract. So how does mirroring look like? You can see here a very simplified table of content, which uses as example headings music. So mirroring provides you with a holistic overview on how the different parts of the thesis relate to each other. You see here music instruments in the different parts, from the introduction, literature review, methodology, findings, analysis, and conclusion sections. So you clearly can see what is in where, and you can spot the apparent inconsistency in this table, can't you? Take a look at it. See what might not be consistent in that table. What is missing, what is double, what is not considered. Anyone? No? Okay, let's move further. So there's clearly a trumpet missing in 2. Now, why is a trumpet missing in 2? I mean, it's part of the findings. There's data shown for 4. It shows there's data on the trumpet. And it's part of their analysis, 5.4. You can see that trumpet. And it's part of the conclusion. So you cover the subject in the conclusion. So how then? This is research, right? And research is supposed to build on the literature. How does it come that this part has not been covered in the literature. Yeah? The data and analysis of your research suggests that the trumpet plays a strong role, then how would you argue that there was no need to consult the literature on what is known about trumpets in that situation? Now, if the trumpet plays a strong role and you consulted the literature on what is known about trumpets in this situation, so you still could have decided to not put it into the literature review chapter. Under which conditions could that have happened? It could have happened, for example, if it was a surprising finding. You didn't expect to find trumpets. Therefore, your initial literature review did not cover that. You went afterwards back to the literature, but still you decided, no, actually, that is a surprising finding. It's covered only as part of the conclusions. And then further research can follow up on that, again, based upon the literature. So it could have been a conscious decision that you as a researcher have been taken on not to include a trumpet in the literature review. And you can explain in your thesis examination and the viva why that has been the case, right? So it is allowing you to have a clear picture of what is in where in your thesis. And this is a very systematic view, and it can be done with any subject. And we will come to the preconditions that obviously apply for mirroring to work out. What are the overall benefits of mirroring? Now, it can be a key to reduce the time to understand the problem. Like, what is my research problem about? Is it about music? Is it about composing music? Or is it about playing music? What is my research doing? It can reduce the time to results because you clearly can see what your findings are and can mirror it back against what you have covered in the literature review. So it can therefore help you to identify your key literature. What is it that is of relevance? Is the trumpet literature on trumpet to be included as a key literature? In this case here, perhaps not. And this allows you to craft better your methodology and to write up your thesis, because you can clearly see how the different parts of your thesis, the chapters in each, are informed. So this helps you to ultimately reduce the time on getting your research done. So as said, we have a mirroring webinar dedicated just to the background, to its history, origins, where it is applied elsewise, and how to get more to the theory. And here is a link to that webinar. Be welcome to take a look to the recording. Now, this webinar today focuses on a subset of mirroring, which is the data literature part, right? So usually literature review, which is perhaps a chapter 2 of your thesis, and the data, which is the chapter 4. And the rest of your thesis is also, as we saw with the music table of contents example, involved. Now, this is visualizing how mirroring as a gradual process might look like. It covers the finding chapter with the problem domain, the problem determinants and stakeholders, and informs the literature review, the methodology also, and also the introduction and conclusion. And how that looks like in practice, we will see in the following slides. Now, what we are seeing here are extracts from headings, chapter headings, section headings, and what you will see here is that we use specific headings. Now, what I see a lot of times in student theses are generic headings. 1.1, problem statement. 1.4, research objective. 1.5, stakeholders. Chapter 2, literature review. Now, if you work over generic titles, you cannot see what's in the box, right? It's a black box. Your entire thesis is unknown. The best titles The best table of content is a table of content, like the music example, that allows to understand and grasp your entire research project over the table of content. If you manage that, likelihood is great, you will pass the Viva immediately. Getting there is, however, extremely demanding because you need to question yourself constantly through your research process and thesis compilation process. What is it exactly about that my research is covering, and how is that spread over the different parts of the thesis? Now, if you see here, 1.3 understanding issues in community-based healthcare provision. So this is an initial problem area, and there are subsets that are outlined on what that problem consists of. In this case, perception issues, absence of guiding policies, contract management, and the like. Now, as you will see, you have the same parts coming up in the literature review. So you understand this is part of the problem as it is outlined initially, and therefore it also should be covered in the literature. So our initial problem understanding can guide us and allow us to establish boundaries and to understand where to stop and what to focus on. So, and this obviously then also can be taken further. A research project proposal usually becomes the chapter 1. And the chapter 1 informs the structure of the findings chapter. As we've seen with the example of the trumpet, there might be surprises. So you will never have the exact match there. But you can get guidance. You can get guidance from initial proposal over the chapter 1 up to your data chapter 4, which can be structured alongside the different problem domains that your research is covering. So as you go along and as you keep that consistency, it helps you to build up your thesis. In this case, you first scan the data that you have already at hand. You understand your research is looking at a community-based healthcare provision problem, and you see some subsets of problem domains that are included there. And therefore, the literature review is covering that, and also then the data collection is focused on getting knowledge for those unknown areas why the problem exists. And then, as the title of the webinar says today, this is a front and back work. So once you get data in your chapter 4 findings, it allows you to go back and mirror back the findings into the literature review. The initial example was the trumpet. You recall the trumpet was not in the literature review, but it was part in the findings. So perhaps I found out something about the trumpet and then looked into the literature, but understood, no, actually, for the problem understanding, this does not need to be covered in the literature review at that point in time, but perhaps you would cover it in chapter 4 in the findings, or in chapter 5 and chapter 6, as the example of the trumpet has been shown. Now, this also then allows you to take further that knowledge into the methodology chapter, because also the methodology chapter is not made up out of the blue. I mean, I do understand that a lot of times doctoral students say, I'm doing interviews, I'm focus groups also, and my research is qualitative, and I want to. I want to. It's not about what you want as a researcher. What it is about, it's a research project that's examining a problem that's based on prior literature, means there's something known about the problem and something unknown, right? There's something known from the literature, and then there's a supposedly gap. So this is what is in the literature review worked out. So your work builds on related studies, and those related studies become part of your methodology. And as you see here in 3.3, it picks up on 2.1, which is to say it picks up from methodologies on community-based healthcare provision, earlier studies that have been already carried out in that domain, and in particular on 331, related studies on the resistance and participation in community-based healthcare provision, which is part of 2.1. So it logically connects, and as initially said, the table of content already is showing this connection and how this all belongs together. Now, the key literature will provide, as just said, you with a research method, like in this example, that not only tells on how to apply mixed methods from an earlier study, a study on tackling with big problems in infection prevention and control, but it also provides a framework that I, as a researcher, potentially could use in my research. And even better, the key literature provides me already with questions that had been used and examined, and for which answers were obtained or which remained perhaps unknown and therefore will be taken further in my research. So it's a very structured way, over mirroring, connected to the methodology and how to extract methods, frameworks, and questions from there and integrate it into your research. So methods specify the data collection further, which is quite obvious. And as you also can see here, 331 is then relating to the findings, because it's part of the objective of what the research wants to carry out and wants to find out about resistance and participation and related problems. Okay. Are there any questions up to this point in time?
Nothing
No?
in chat.
Okay. So, as said, it's a front and back. So once you're at the methodology and you look front into the data, that then will allow you to go back to your literature review chapter and to revise that. It's a constant process. And while often it looks like a thesis is written in a linear way, it really is not. So as you gradually go through this, and this is an example from a thesis that we have been supporting. And as you see here, you can use all of the information from the table of content and from having very specific titles for each of the sections to show in the introduction chapter of your thesis how your research belongs to each other, what are the questions and where are they covered, and ultimately to present in a neat and nice linear way how the research looks like. Now in this example, you're walked through from the start, the initial assumptions, up to the end of the research findings, how the different chapters inform each other and what has been done where. It's a gradual process. It takes time, and this is a maturity stage of the end. If you would want to see all of the development in between, take a look at that other webinar that we gave on the theory. There you also will have that covered. With this, we will look at the same subject now from a different angle. If there are no questions by now, are there any questions? Okay.
Nothing in chat.
Okay. As I said already, the proposal informs your initial chapter 1, which informs afterwards your data collection chapter. So the structures are mirrored and taken further, at least in the ideal case. Obviously, we talk about research, and research means also to deal with the unknown. And if we see that the research is developing in a total different direction as it was outlined in the initial research proposal, then obviously this mirroring will not take place in a linear or in a smooth way, but there will be some more radical changes. But then again, you might move back at a later point, because if it runs smoothly, then the key literature sources will inform the different parts of your thesis, and you can mirror them out from that part. If you see some unexpected developments, totally radically different findings that you had expected, so then in that case, you not likely will need to mirror back the structure of your thesis and the coverage based upon the data and findings, and then you can build up harmony over that end, if that does make sense. And in a more practical way, as it would be looking like, this is how you take from the data and findings the mirroring approach. You start over the different problem domains, the problem fields, the themes, whatever your research is putting in and finding there. If you're having a quantitative study, then that might not be themes, but other indicators. Nevertheless, you need to cover them. You need to properly introduce them within your problem issue statement so that they are part of it, that they are part of the description of the problem, that they become part of the scene setting information of your literature review chapter, that they provide, that's 2.1, 2.2, that the context and baseline information is matching, and that they then lead to the specifics of the literature review, which in this case would be 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. And that it's also then taken further in the methodology. So this is a gradual process, and as you go along, you will get more clarity over your research, more clarity of the structure of your research, and therefore can clearly understand how the different chapters inform each other. Now, this is a table of content from the earliest images that I've been showing you on chapter 1, how to present in a visualized way your research. And as you will see here, there are some, we used color codes in this case, or the thesis used color codes to show how the different fields belong to each other and where things are covered in the thesis. And you will see white spots. And these white spots are there because they are still generic. This is not the final stage, not the final maturity stage of the table of content, but was somehow, I don't know, 75% through the research. But they allow you to clearly understand where is consistency already in place in your research and where is it not. If you just generically talk about research questions and aim of the research, you cannot check if that is covered in any further part of the research. If you start to give it specific names, then you can see 9.1.1, for example, on the conclusion side, that research question 1 was covering what explains energy use at home. You still cannot see that on the left side once you look into the introduction. You do not know if research question 1 was properly introduced. You also do not see really where it was in detail covered in the literature review and in the findings and analysis. You can see already some yellow color coding, so you have an idea on where it is, but it's still not very precise. If you compare the chapters 2 here with the chapter 3, then you see already a higher level of detail, and for even a higher level, a bigger granularity. So this is what can be worked out over time, and it allows you to be guided through your research. Now, does that make sense? Are there any questions to this point in time?
Nothing in chat.
Okay. So, what are the prerequisites for data literature mirroring or mirroring in general to work? Now, it requires preciseness. And all too often, what I do see is that students are very quick in writing, but for the cost of preciseness. Now, words do matter. Do we call it a trumpet, or how do we call it? What am I doing here? be sure you know your key terms and you have a document where you keep an overview, what the key terms are, how they relate to each other, and what is in the core of your research and what is out. And also understand synonyms. Which words are used instead? Every scientist wants to make their landmark. They need to find new things to advance in their career. Therefore, they need to create new learning, and this often leads to synonyms. So understand the role of the ego of scientists in this scientific process and the results it has. Now, let me provide you on this with a very concrete example. This is from my thesis, and those were key terms I've been confronted with. Now, by the time I started my thesis, it was about e-learning. That was a hype by then. But e-learning was actually nothing new. It was a part of what was before technology-enhanced learning, right? It had a history of 20, 30 years of research. Now, meanwhile, I focused on e-learning. My first professors told me, you only cover the learning side. How about the teaching side? I said, fine. And they said, yeah, so then call it e-teaching. I said, do we now add an E to every single word that we use? E-living, e-eating, but they insisted, call it like that. So I said, okay, I do that. So I looked into the literature and I read a lot about computer-assisted learning, about virtual learning environments, personal learning environments, connected learning, meshed up learning. That was a hype at that point in time. And then came, by the year 2012, like 5 years later, massive open online learning. Wow, MOOCs. Now, is that totally new? What has it in common with open source? And what has it in common with open access and with open educational resources? And why are massive open online courses a result of constructionism and pilots with constructivism? And why are people from the open source software field so interested and excited about the open character of the open online courses? Right? So how did that all belong together? Did it? Now, this is something I needed to make sense for myself out of it. No one could take those shots. Literature obviously could inform me. But by mirroring out what am I actually doing in my research, I understood what is important to my research. It was a mode of delivery, which I've been dealing with. So it's very simplified. I could put all of the parts from the literature into that nice healing. It was pedagogic approaches that I dealt with. I had a framing of my research. Yeah, it was framed in constructivism. So I looked into pedagogic approaches. It was certainly about personalization. And it was to a certain degree about accessibility and technology. Now, still there were some question marks at that point in time, like where put I in massive open online courses? As it turned out, the subject of my research, as a matter of fact, was about massive open online courses. Just that I never called it like that, because by the time I started my research, massive open online courses did not exist. So I've been researching something which at the same time was emergent, which then was named, but I didn't call it like that. And obviously, in hindsight, I couldn't say I started a research in 26 on massive open online courses if massive open online courses were only named in 2012. So it was part of the outcome of my research where it could be named. But it gave me clarity to defend that during the Viper examination. Why is it like that? Because, yeah, I've been looking into open education environments, but not into massive open online courses because they did not exist by the time. But yes, they do have something in common with the research that I've been carrying out. And no, since they are only now about to emerge, I could not cover that in the literature review. Do you remember the trumpet earlier? So it was a deliberate decision that I took to not cover it in the literature review, but only have it as part of the analysis. And sorry for that cough. So make sure you understand what is your trumpet, and also to understand that getting specific takes time, as I've just shown in the example. This is an example where you can see initial statements. And this is common once I work with students, that problem statements are very vague at the beginning, and that those factors like personal values, purchase, or products are only specified over time. And if you use mirroring, again, it can help you to understand where are in your thesis those descriptions still more vague and where are they already more precise. So this mirroring is a process that requires time. It's an evolutionary process, and you only can say, okay, I will attempt to use it, and therefore I remind myself to work very precise, to take stock of what I'm doing, to update all of the namings as I go along, and this ultimately then will lead to the fact that you have a very well and neatly aligned thesis, where each parts inform each others and where you have a very holistic understanding what your research is about, but also very specific understanding in which section do I cover what. And once you reach that level of clarity about your research, I can assure you, once it comes to the Viva day, it will be like a walk through the park. At least I didn't prepare a second for the Viva, because after all of the years, it was clear to me where the content and information is and why things have been done as they are. Now, not preparing for Viva is actually a very bad recommendation, because the best students are those that get prepared for the Viva and exactly know what examination questions mean and how to respond on them. And with this, we will get into the closing part and go off the record and allow for some discussions. But before doing so, let me come back to the Viva. You should prepare for the Viva, and why you should be doing so, you will see if you will attend the webinar in 2 weeks, which will exactly deal with Viva preparation and show you why some questions might be really, really tricky. If an examiner asks you, for example, what fascinated you most in your research? The last thing the examiner is interested in is what fascinated you in your research from a personal perspective, but what is from a scientific perspective fascinating. So knowing how to read questions in the correct way is crucial, and be welcome to learn more about that in our next webinar. Let me now stop this recording for today. Yeah, okay.